Most people spend their lives believing that money changes people. They watch an ordinary man become wealthy and suddenly grow arrogant. They see a successful entrepreneur become controlling, a celebrity become entitled, or a millionaire become obsessed with status. From the outside, it looks as though wealth created a completely different person. But Machiavelli would argue something far more unsettling. Money changes almost nothing. It simply removes the mask. The moment financial power enters someone's life, it exposes the character that was quietly waiting underneath all along. This is why chasing money before building yourself is one of the most dangerous ambitions a person can have. Wealth magnifies whatever already exists inside you. If insecurity lives beneath the surface, money gives it a louder voice. If your identity depends on validation, wealth only increases your need for admiration. You begin measuring yourself through expensive possessions, public recognition, and the reactions of strangers. What looked like confidence was never confidence at all. It was dependence, disguised as success. History repeats this lesson relentlessly. Kings did not become tyrants because they gained power. Power simply gave their hidden impulses room to operate without resistance. Business leaders do not suddenly become generous because they become rich. They simply gain greater capacity to express the values they already possessed. Money acts like a spotlight. It illuminates qualities that were difficult to notice when resources were limited. Character is revealed most clearly when consequences become smaller. That is why truly powerful people build discipline before they build wealth. They understand that self-control is a stronger form of protection than money itself. A person who cannot control their emotions while earning a modest income will rarely control them after acquiring millions. More money only creates more opportunities to make the same mistakes on a larger scale. Bigger accounts do not solve internal weaknesses. They finance them. Modern culture encourages the opposite philosophy. Society celebrates visible success while ignoring invisible character. People are taught to pursue luxury first and maturity later, believing financial achievement will automatically produce confidence, wisdom, and respect. But respect cannot be purchased because genuine authority has never depended on possessions. The wealthiest person in the room can still appear weak if every decision is driven by ego, fear, or the desperate need to impress others. Meanwhile, someone with far less money can quietly command attention through composure alone. Behavioral psychology explains why this happens. Human beings naturally amplify existing habits when external pressure disappears. Scarcity forces caution because mistakes are expensive. Abundance removes many of those limits, allowing instinct to replace restraint. This is why money often reveals generosity just as easily as greed. It reveals patience just as clearly as arrogance. Wealth does not rewrite personality. It simply removes the barriers that were temporarily keeping it under control. The people who build lasting fortunes understand this long before they become wealthy. They spend years strengthening the qualities that money cannot buy: discipline, patience, emotional stability, and independent thinking. Those traits become the real foundation of their success because they survive market crashes, business failures, and financial setbacks. Money may disappear, but character remains. And the person capable of creating wealth once can usually create it again because the real asset was never the money. It was the mindset behind it. This is why Machiavelli never admired wealth for its own sake. He studied what wealth revealed about the people holding it. Some became calmer because they were no longer controlled by fear. Others became louder because insecurity finally had the resources to perform. Some used money to create opportunities for others. Others used it to purchase attention they could never earn through character. The difference was never the size of the fortune. The difference was the person standing behind it. Before asking how to make more money, ask a more dangerous question. If wealth multiplied every part of your current personality, would you become someone others genuinely respect, or simply someone impossible to ignore? Because one day success may arrive faster than you expect. When it does, it will not create a new identity. It will reveal the one you have been building in silence all along. And that is the first rule Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone else. Money has never been the source of power. It is only the mirror that exposes who truly deserves to hold it. Modern society teaches you to make success visible, Buy the luxury car. Post the expensive vacation. Wear the watch that proves you've made it. Display every milestone as evidence that you are winning. People assume attention is influence and visibility is power, but Machiavelli would argue the opposite. The moment everyone knows exactly how much you have, exactly what you own, and exactly how successful you are, you begin surrendering one of the greatest strategic advantages a person can possess: uncertainty. Human beings instinctively measure what they can see. The moment your wealth becomes public, people begin calculating you. They estimate your income, your weaknesses, your ambitions, your lifestyle, even your vulnerabilities. Some become envious. Others become competitive. A few begin looking for opportunities to benefit from your success. What was meant to create admiration quietly creates attention from people whose intentions you can never fully understand. The louder your wealth becomes, the easier you become to predict. This is why truly influential people rarely feel the need to advertise their position. They understand that power grows stronger when it cannot be measured accurately. A quiet business owner who controls several successful companies often possesses more real influence than someone constantly displaying luxury online. The difference is psychological. One creates curiosity, the other creates certainty. And certainty reduces leverage because people stop wondering what you are capable of. Mystery forces people to remain cautious. Transparency often invites comparison. Throughout history, the individuals who held lasting influence rarely revealed the full extent of their resources. Powerful families protected their financial structures. Great strategists concealed their intentions until the moment action became unavoidable. Even in negotiation, revealing every advantage weakens your position because the other side immediately adjusts their strategy. Information is leverage, and unnecessary disclosure is often a silent transfer of leverage to someone else. This does not mean pretending to be smaller than you are out of fear. It means understanding the value of strategic restraint. There is a difference between confidence and exhibition. Confident people rarely need constant confirmation from strangers because their identity is not built on public recognition. They understand that real wealth exists to create freedom, not performance. The more secure someone becomes internally, the less interested they are in convincing the world they are successful. Behavioral psychology explains why visible wealth attracts so much attention. Human beings constantly compare themselves with others. When someone displays luxury, observers immediately begin measuring their own lives against it. Some become inspired, but many become resentful without realizing why. Comparison quietly transforms respect into competition. Instead of admiring your success, people begin searching for flaws that allow them to protect their own self-image. Excessive visibility therefore creates emotional reactions that have little to do with money itself and everything to do with human nature. The truly dangerous individual understands something different. Influence does not come from showing people everything. It comes from allowing people to know enough to respect you while never revealing enough to define you completely. When your resources, relationships, and long-term plans remain difficult to measure, people naturally become more careful around you. They hesitate before making assumptions because uncertainty increases psychological weight. Your silence begins creating more influence than constant explanation ever could. This principle applies beyond money. Businesses that reveal every strategic move give competitors time to respond. Individuals who announce every ambition invite unnecessary criticism before meaningful progress has even begun. Those who quietly execute often arrive far ahead because they spent their energy building instead of performing. Results become more powerful when they appear unexpectedly. Surprise has always been one of strategy's greatest allies. Machiavelli understood that people obsessed with displaying power usually possess less of it than they appear. Those who truly control valuable assets rarely waste energy proving they do. They let outcomes speak, while others remain distracted by appearances. In a world where everyone is competing for visibility, quiet competence becomes increasingly rare, and rarity creates value. The greatest advantage is not becoming invisible. It is becoming impossible to measure accurately. Let others underestimate your resources. Let them misunderstand your intentions. Let them believe they have already figured you out while your strongest advantages remain hidden beneath the surface. Because the moment people stop calculating your possessions and start questioning your true capabilities, the balance of power quietly shifts in your favor. That is why invisible wealth has always created more influence than visible wealth ever could. Most people believe earning a high income means they are becoming financially free. Every promotion feels like progress. Every raise feels like proof that life is moving in the right direction. But Machiavelli would ask a far more uncomfortable question. What happens if someone else decides your income stops tomorrow? If a single employer, one client, one platform, or one decision outside your control can erase your financial security overnight, do you truly own your wealth, or are you simply renting it? This is the illusion that traps millions of people. They confuse earning with ownership. A large salary creates comfort, but comfort is not the same as independence. As long as your financial future depends entirely on someone else's approval, your security remains conditional. You may have more money than ever before, yet your freedom is still borrowed. The chains are simply covered with better furniture, nicer vacations, and a larger paycheck. Machiavelli understood that dependence is one of the easiest ways to control human behavior. People rarely need to be threatened directly. Once they fear losing access to their income, they begin limiting themselves automatically. They become more careful with their opinions. They avoid difficult conversations. They tolerate situations they know are unhealthy because survival quietly becomes more important than freedom. The strongest prison is often the one people voluntarily protect because leaving feels too expensive. This pattern appears everywhere. Businesses that rely on a single customer eventually negotiate from weakness. Content creators who depend entirely on one platform lose control the moment algorithms change. Employees whose lifestyle expands as fast as their salary slowly discover that every monthly expense reduces their ability to walk away. On the surface, they appear successful. In reality, every new financial obligation gives someone else greater influence over their choices. Builders approach money differently because they understand that ownership creates options. Instead of asking how to earn more, they ask how to control more. They build businesses instead of relying on one paycheck. They acquire assets instead of only collecting income. They invest in systems capable of producing value long after today's work is finished. Every step toward ownership reduces dependence, and every reduction in dependence increases freedom. Wealth stops being measured only by income and begins being measured by how little permission you need from anyone else. This is why intelligent people diversify more than their investments. They diversify their sources of income, their skills, their relationships, and their opportunities. They know the future is unpredictable, so they avoid allowing one person or one institution to hold complete control over their financial life. If one source disappears, another continues operating. What looks like caution is actually resilience. They are not trying to predict every crisis. They are building structures capable of surviving almost any crisis. There is another psychological advantage that ownership provides. The moment you know you can survive without a particular opportunity, your decisions become clearer. Fear loses its influence because desperation disappears. Negotiations improve because you no longer accept poor terms simply to protect today's income. You become patient enough to reject bad opportunities while waiting for better ones. Ironically, the less you need immediate money, the easier it becomes to create more of it. This is why many of history's most successful builders focused less on chasing income and more on constructing systems. A system does not rely on daily motivation. It continues producing value because the foundation has already been built. Businesses, investments, intellectual property, equity, and ownership all share one powerful characteristic. They separate future income from today's labor. Over time, your effort shifts from constantly producing money to creating structures that produce money on your behalf. Machiavelli never feared temporary poverty as much as permanent dependence. Poverty can be temporary when capability remains. Dependence quietly becomes permanent because people begin organizing their entire lives around protecting what someone else controls. They stop taking intelligent risks. They stop building alternatives. Eventually, they confuse comfort with freedom, even though the two are completely different things. Real financial independence begins the moment ownership replaces dependence as your primary objective. Earn money, but never stop asking what that money is building. Let every paycheck become another brick in a system that no longer relies entirely on your time or another person's permission. Because the highest form of wealth is not earning more than everyone else. It is reaching the point where your future no longer depends on decisions made by people you cannot control. That is the freedom Machiavelli respected, not loud, not visible, but nearly impossible to take away. People often say they understand someone because of the conversations they have shared, the promises they have heard, or the years they have spent together. Machiavelli believed none of those things revealed a person's true nature. Words are cheap because they cost nothing. Loyalty declared during comfort requires no sacrifice. Character only becomes visible when incentives change, and nothing changes incentives faster than money. The moment wealth enters a relationship, hidden motives begin rising to the surface. Money does not create betrayal, it simply removes the reasons people were hiding it. This is why financial success often changes relationships in unexpected ways. When you struggle, many people feel comfortable around you because your life reflects their own. But when you begin succeeding, the emotional balance shifts. Some celebrate your progress because your success inspires them. Others become strangely distant, sarcastic, or competitive. You did not become their enemy overnight. Your growth simply forced them to compare your progress with their own decisions. That comparison awakens emotions that had been quietly waiting beneath the surface. The same principle applies when people gain access to your resources. Gratitude can slowly become expectation. Expectation becomes entitlement. Eventually, what once felt like generosity begins to look like obligation. This transformation rarely happens because people consciously become selfish. It happens because human beings adapt quickly to comfort. What once felt extraordinary soon begins to feel normal. The more predictable your generosity becomes, the less people appreciate it. Appreciation fades whenever value becomes expected instead of earned. Machiavelli understood this better than most. Instead of judging people by what they promised, he watched how they behaved when incentives changed. Give someone responsibility and observe whether humility survives authority. Give someone opportunity and see whether gratitude survives success. Share resources and notice whether respect grows stronger or weaker. Every financial interaction becomes information. Money quietly reveals priorities that words were carefully hiding. Behavioral psychology explains why this happens. Human beings naturally respond to incentives long before they respond to principles. When enough money, status, or personal benefit appears, many people unconsciously adjust their values to justify the decision they already want to make. This is why intelligent leaders spend less time listening to declarations of loyalty and more time understanding motivations. Once you know what someone fears losing or hopes to gain, their future behavior becomes far easier to predict. Builders therefore learn to observe patterns instead of isolated moments. One act of generosity does not prove character, just as one mistake does not define it. What matters is consistency across changing circumstances. Does someone remain trustworthy after becoming successful? Do they remain respectful after gaining influence? Do they celebrate your victories without secretly competing against them? Character is revealed when incentives change, but principles remain the same. Another lesson most people overlook is that money also tests your own behavior. Success creates opportunities to become impatient, arrogant, or emotionally attached to status. Every financial milestone quietly asks the same question. Are you using money as a tool, or are you allowing money to reshape your identity? The answer determines whether wealth strengthens your character or slowly begins controlling it. Before judging the loyalty of others, learn to examine your own reactions with equal honesty. This is why wise people never rush to trust someone based only on pleasant words or shared history. They create small opportunities for character to reveal itself naturally. A business partnership, shared responsibility, or financial decision often teaches more about a person than years of casual conversation. There is no need for dramatic tests or elaborate traps. Life eventually presents enough situations where incentives change, and those moments reveal everything that truly matters. Machiavelli understood that money is one of the clearest mirrors ever created. It exposes generosity without announcing it. It exposes greed without accusing it. It exposes loyalty without demanding it. Those who learn to observe these signals stop being surprised by human behavior because they understand a timeless truth. People rarely become different when money appears. They simply become easier to see. And once you learn to read what wealth reveals, instead of listening only to what people say, you begin making better decisions about who deserves your trust, your partnership, and your future. Most people spend their lives chasing money, believing the next promotion, the next client, or the next paycheck will finally give them freedom. Every decision revolves around earning more. Every opportunity is judged by how much it pays today. But Machiavelli saw a game hidden beneath the one everyone else was playing. He realized that the greatest power never belongs to the person chasing rewards. It belongs to the person controlling access to those rewards. The hunter is always dependent on the next opportunity. The architect creates opportunities that others eventually depend upon. This distinction changes everything. Imagine two people. One works tirelessly to earn an impressive income. The other builds a system that allows hundreds of people to earn income through it. Both may become wealthy, but only one has created leverage. The first person must continue running. The second becomes the destination others naturally move toward. Money follows both, but influence follows only one. Throughout history, the most powerful individuals rarely controlled everything themselves. They controlled the flow. Kings did not farm every field or build every road. They controlled the systems through which resources moved. Modern businesses operate the same way. The world's most valuable companies often produce very little themselves. Instead, they create platforms where buyers and sellers meet, where creators find audiences, or where businesses depend on their infrastructure. They do not own every transaction. They own the path through which transactions happen. This is the difference between earning value and becoming the source of value. Most people ask, how can I make more money? Builders ask a far more powerful question. How can I become difficult to replace? The answer rarely comes from working harder. It comes from creating something people continue needing long after the initial effort has ended. A valuable network, a trusted brand, a business system, specialized knowledge, intellectual property. These assets quietly increase influence because they make other people's progress partially dependent on your existence. Behavioral psychology explains why this creates such extraordinary leverage. Human beings naturally protect access to anything they believe improves their future. Once people associate you with opportunity, stability, or growth, their behavior changes automatically. They become more cooperative. They communicate differently. They seek stronger relationships because losing access now carries a meaningful cost. You never demanded loyalty. You created enough value that loyalty became the rational decision. This is also why chasing status often produces the opposite result. Many people want recognition before they have created meaningful value. They seek titles instead of capability, attention instead of usefulness. But titles disappear, trends change, and public admiration fades quickly. Value is different. People never stop searching for individuals who consistently solve important problems. The more essential your contribution becomes, the less you need to convince others of your importance. Your work begins speaking before you enter the room. Network leverage amplifies this principle even further. One valuable relationship creates another. One trusted introduction leads to new opportunities. One successful partnership attracts others. Over time, influence compounds just like capital. What began as one useful connection gradually becomes an ecosystem where opportunities circulate naturally. At that point, you are no longer searching for doors to open. You have quietly become one of the doors others hope will open for them. Notice that truly influential people rarely appear desperate. They do not need to chase every opportunity because opportunities increasingly come toward them. This calmness is not luck. It is the result of years spent building systems instead of chasing transactions. Every business they create, every relationship they strengthen, and every reputation they protect increases the flow of value through their position. They understand that controlling the flow will always create greater freedom than constantly competing for individual rewards. Machiavelli understood that lasting influence has never belonged to the loudest person or even the richest one. It belongs to the individual who quietly becomes indispensable. Stop asking how to earn a larger share of the game. Start asking how to build part of the game that others cannot easily play without. Because the moment people depend on your knowledge, your systems, your network, or your ability to create value, the balance of power changes forever. You stop chasing opportunities one by one and begin occupying the position where opportunities naturally arrive. That is where real leverage begins, and where temporary success slowly transforms into lasting power. Most people believe money creates freedom. Machiavelli believed something far more dangerous. Money only reveals whether you were free to begin with. A person who cannot control their emotions before becoming wealthy will not suddenly become calm after acquiring millions. In fact, wealth often strengthens emotional dependence rather than eliminating it. The more attached you become to money, comfort, status, or approval, the easier you become to control. Real power begins the moment your decisions stop being driven by the fear of losing what you own. Look carefully at how people negotiate. The individual who desperately needs the deal almost always accepts worse terms. The investor who cannot tolerate temporary losses sells at the worst possible moment. The entrepreneur who fears rejection lowers prices too quickly. In every situation, emotion quietly transfers leverage to the other side. Desperation rarely announces itself with words. It appears through rushed decisions, unnecessary compromises, and the inability to walk away when logic clearly says you should. Machiavelli understood that dependence is psychological before it is financial. The moment someone discovers what you cannot afford to lose, they gain influence over your behavior. It may be money, it may be status, it may be comfort, reputation, or the approval of others. Every emotional attachment creates a pressure point, and every pressure point becomes an opportunity for manipulation. The strongest people are not those with the most resources. They are those with the fewest emotional chains attached to those resources. This is why emotional detachment should never be confused with indifference. Detached people still care deeply about building wealth, protecting relationships, and creating meaningful work. The difference is that they refuse to let temporary outcomes control their judgment. A failed investment does not destroy their confidence. A successful year does not inflate their ego. Praise does not define them, and criticism does not paralyze them. Their identity remains stable, while circumstances continue changing around them. Behavioral psychology explains why this mindset is so rare. Human beings naturally overvalue what they already possess. Once comfort becomes familiar, the possibility of losing it feels far more painful than the excitement of gaining something new. This bias quietly traps people inside situations they have already outgrown. They stay in careers they dislike, investments they no longer believe in, and relationships that limit their potential because protecting familiarity feels safer than embracing uncertainty. Comfort slowly becomes another form of dependency. Builders develop a different advantage. They create what can be called psychological optionality. Instead of relying on one source of income, one opportunity, or one identity, they build alternatives. They acquire valuable skills, diversify their assets, strengthen their networks, and maintain enough financial stability to make decisions from logic rather than fear. The more options they possess, the less pressure any single outcome carries. That freedom changes everything. Negotiations improve because they no longer need immediate approval. Investments improve because patience replaces panic. Opportunities become easier to recognize because desperation no longer clouds judgment. Notice how the calmest person in the room often holds the greatest influence. They are never rushing to prove themselves. They are comfortable saying no. They are willing to wait while everyone else reacts emotionally. This composure is not a personality trait. It is the result of building a life where survival does not depend on winning every battle. They understand that losing one opportunity is insignificant compared to protecting the ability to recognize the next one. Machiavelli believed the ultimate advantage belonged to the person who could walk away without fear, not because they cared less, but because they had already separated their identity from temporary outcomes. Money became a tool rather than a source of self-worth. Success became a result rather than proof of personal value. Once that transformation occurs, manipulation becomes remarkably difficult because fear no longer dictates behavior. In the end, financial strength is not measured by the size of your portfolio, but by the stability of your mind. Wealth may increase your options, but only emotional discipline allows you to use those options wisely. The people who create lasting influence are rarely controlled by greed during prosperity or fear during hardship. They remain patient when others become desperate, rational when others become emotional, and independent when others become attached. That is why emotional detachment is not the absence of ambition. It is the highest form of financial strength, because the person who no longer needs money to protect their identity becomes almost impossible to control. Most people want to be noticed. They want recognition, applause, and visible proof that they have succeeded. They measure progress by how many people admire them, how often their name is mentioned, or how impressive their lifestyle appears from the outside. Machiavelli saw a weakness hidden inside that desire. The more your success depends on constant attention, the more fragile it becomes. Attention is temporary. Systems endure. The people who remain powerful for decades are rarely those who attract the most attention. They are the ones who quietly build structures that continue creating value long after the spotlight has moved elsewhere. This is why temporary success and lasting influence are rarely created by the same strategy. Temporary success often depends on performance. You must constantly prove yourself, produce results, defend your position, and convince others that you still deserve their admiration. It becomes exhausting because every victory demands another performance. A system works differently. Once designed correctly, it continues producing outcomes with less dependence on constant effort. Businesses operate without the founder making every decision. Investments continue compounding without daily supervision. Reputation attracts opportunities before introductions are even made. The system quietly begins replacing personal effort. History repeatedly rewards builders who focus on invisible architecture instead of visible celebration. Powerful families protected ownership structures instead of displaying luxury. Great businesses invested more energy refining operations than advertising success. Exceptional leaders spent years building capable people rather than making themselves appear indispensable. They understood a simple principle. The stronger the system becomes, the less the individual must constantly prove their value. This is why revealing everything can become a strategic mistake. Modern culture encourages people to explain every process, announce every achievement, and document every step of their journey. While transparency has value, complete transparency often removes leverage. The moment people fully understand how your advantage works, they begin looking for ways to copy it. Machiavelli believed that influence grows stronger when part of the mechanism remains invisible, not because of deception, but because rarity creates value. The less replaceable your system becomes, the stronger your long-term position. Another overlooked principle is selective generosity. Most people either give too little or too much. They help everyone until appreciation disappears, or they help no one because they fear being exploited. Builders think differently. They create value deliberately and at meaningful moments. They understand that timing often matters more than quantity. A solution delivered exactly when someone needs it creates a deeper impression than endless favors given without intention. Lasting influence comes from becoming memorable, not merely available. Systems also protect you from one of the greatest enemies of success: inconsistency. Motivation rises and falls. Public attention shifts. Economic conditions change. But a well-designed system continues operating through all of them. It reduces dependence on emotion because important decisions have already been built into the structure. This is why disciplined investors rely on investment systems instead of headlines. And successful businesses rely on processes instead of personalities. Strong systems create predictable results in unpredictable environments. There is another advantage most people overlook. Systems preserve energy. Constantly proving yourself consumes attention that could have been invested in building something larger. Every hour spent chasing validation is an hour not spent strengthening the engine, producing real value. Quiet builders understand this trade-off. They allow results to become their reputation, while competitors remain occupied, maintaining appearances. Over time, the difference becomes enormous because one person compounds attention, while the other compounds assets, trust, and capability. Notice how the most respected individuals often appear remarkably calm. They rarely rush to explain themselves because their systems already speak on their behalf. Their businesses continue operating. Their reputation continues opening doors. Their relationships continue creating opportunities. They are not dependent on being the loudest voice in the room because influence has already been built into the structure surrounding them. Success becomes an atmosphere rather than a performance. Machiavelli understood that loud success attracts admiration, but quiet systems create permanence. Build something that continues working when you are silent. Protect the process instead of celebrating every outcome. Invest more energy in strengthening the engine than displaying the results it produces. Because applause disappears, trends fade, and public attention always moves on. But a well-built system continues generating wealth, influence, and freedom long after the noise has ended. That is why the strongest empires are rarely built through constant visibility. They are built through invisible structures that become stronger with every passing year, while the world remains distracted by appearances. Modern society teaches a simple equation. The more you own, the more powerful you become. Bigger houses, larger bank accounts, greater influence, endless recognition. People spend decades chasing more because they believe every new possession brings them closer to freedom. Machiavelli reached the opposite conclusion. The strongest person is rarely the one who possesses the most. It is the one who can lose the most without losing themselves. Real power begins where dependence ends. Every desire creates a potential weakness. If you desperately need admiration, someone can manipulate you with praise. If you cannot live without luxury, someone can control you by threatening your comfort. If your identity depends on status, you will eventually sacrifice your principles to protect your image. Human beings are rarely controlled by force alone. They are controlled by whatever they believe they cannot afford to lose. The fewer emotional dependencies you carry, the fewer doors life leaves open for manipulation. This is why many wealthy people never experience freedom despite extraordinary financial success. Their income grows, but so do their needs. A larger lifestyle demands larger expenses. Public success demands constant validation. More possessions create more anxiety about protecting them. Instead of owning wealth, they slowly become employees of the life they built. Every financial decision becomes driven by maintenance rather than purpose. From the outside, they appear successful. Internally, they have simply exchanged one form of dependence for another. Machiavelli admired a different kind of strength. He respected individuals who could walk away when necessary, not because they rejected money, but because money never became their master. They understood that freedom is measured by choice, not consumption. When you no longer need every opportunity, every compliment, or every luxury to feel complete, your judgment becomes remarkably clear. Fear begins losing its influence because there is less left to threaten. Behavioral psychology supports this principle. Human beings quickly adapt to every improvement in comfort. What once felt extraordinary soon becomes ordinary, creating an endless cycle of wanting more simply to experience the same satisfaction. This is known as the hedonic treadmill. The destination constantly moves because expectations rise as quickly as achievements. Builders recognize this trap early. Instead of endlessly expanding consumption, they focus on expanding capability, ownership, and peace of mind. They understand that satisfaction built on external possessions will always remain temporary. This creates what can be called the freedom threshold. Beyond a certain point, additional money no longer changes your quality of life nearly as much as greater control over your time, your attention, and your decisions. Wealth reaches its highest purpose when it stops proving your value and starts protecting your independence. Money becomes a tool rather than an identity. It creates options instead of ego. That shift separates those who merely accumulate wealth from those who truly master it. Notice how the calmest people often possess the greatest resilience. They negotiate without desperation because they can afford to wait. They invest without panic because temporary losses do not threaten their identity. They reject opportunities that conflict with their principles because survival no longer depends on accepting every offer. Their confidence comes from knowing they could rebuild if everything disappeared tomorrow. That certainty cannot be purchased. It is earned by developing discipline, patience, adaptability, and self-control long before wealth arrives. This is the lesson hidden beneath every principle in this video. Money reveals character. Quiet wealth creates leverage. Ownership creates freedom. Systems outlast attention. Emotional detachment protects judgment. All of these ideas ultimately point toward the same destination: reducing dependence. Every unnecessary craving gives the outside world greater influence over your choices. Every step toward internal stability makes manipulation increasingly difficult. The person who needs less naturally gains more control over their own life. Machiavelli never worshipped money because he understood its true purpose. Money was never the final reward. It was simply another instrument capable of creating freedom for those wise enough to remain independent from it. Build wealth, but never build your identity around wealth. Pursue success, but never allow success to become a psychological necessity, because in the end, the greatest fortune is not the size of your portfolio or the luxury surrounding your life. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that no amount of money and no loss of money can ever control who you are. That is the highest level of power, and it belongs only to the people who have mastered themselves before they ever mastered wealth.